Hey, what's up, guys? Whoa! It's been a while. I haven't come to you from this angle in quite some time. I used to do all my videos like this. I go through different phases, aka patterns. It's not Wildstorm Wednesday. If you're not familiar with Wildstorm Wednesday, every Wednesday we're supposed to highlight Wildstorm Productions. We're 2 weeks without Wildstorm Productions, but I had an episode idea that I thought I could wedge into Wildstorm Wednesday, and that is today's episode. It's Jim Lee. Guys, we're critical. We're critical about Jim Lee on this channel. It doesn't mean we don't love him. I feel like I'm Ike Turner sometimes. Like I make a video and I'm punching Jim Lee, but I'm telling him I love him at the same time. Jim Lee #1. I bet a lot of you out there, you cannot mentally catalog the #1 issues or the series that Jim Lee has launched. We're going to go through them and some misconceptions, little areas that you guys think you might remember something. I get DMs about Jim Lee drawing Stormwatch. Yeah, he's like drawn one issue of all of it. Jim Lee didn't draw Stormwatch until Stormwatch became a sensation, when it became the authority, and then all of a sudden Jim Lee was all in. So guys, let's hit that drawing table. Jim Lee issue 1s. Let's go. So let's just start with Hush. Hush is not a #1, but Hush is in large regarded as Jim Lee's comeback effort. People were ecstatic. They were in shock that Jim Lee maintained a 12-month schedule for this book. And we all know how much lead time he had. He could have worked on these pages for 14, 15, 21 months. Who knows? But Hush came out regularly. And we loved it. We loved the month-to-month mystery. But what did Jim Lee come back from, if this is his comeback effort? So let's get into the other street-level character. Jim Lee helped launch the Punisher War Journal. This is issue 1. Carl Potts. He was intertwined with Jim Lee during Alpha Flight. Jim Lee didn't draw Alpha Flight #1. We know that was John Byrne. But with Carl Potts, script and layouts, Jim Lee took Carl's direction, his veteranship, the overall attitude of storytelling. Jim Lee learned, adopted, and brought that into X-Men. And what we have here, and this will be a separate episode, I've been planning for about a year to do like a full Punisher rundown. And I've been back and forth with trying to get a Punisher first appearance for that video series. So, fingers crossed. This is fantastic because we have our modern day saga here, right? And then on the bottom of every single page, we recount the day the Punisher became the Punisher, when his family was executed because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. So we get like 2 different ways to present the story. We can read it, we can read the top and get the issue 1, the modern, as what we will consider the modern day. Or we can read the bottom and get the recount of his origin. It's so inventive. I love it. No one really talks about this. But see, we get the skull. And later, if we go to Punisher Born, the Marvel Max series, I believe that was Garth Ennis. It's somewhat, when the Punisher went to Vietnam, he made a pact with the devil to survive, and he would have to pay a price, and the price was his family. He paid that price for his family's blood. So Jim Lee launches Punisher War Journal, and this continues on for a solid almost 10 years. What's the next Jim Lee #1? Well, I think you guys know. X-Men #1, the highest selling comic book of all time. I want to make a note because I feel, and I will keep making this point on this channel until it shatters the comic book grid. See here, we have one SKU, right? Like this is a SKU, you would order this. And the different SKU, for example, would be this cover. So we have the interconnecting covers. These are separate SKUs than this. Now, here's the amazing thing. And Jim Lee speaks about this in an interview where when we go through this issue, we have, the straight up story, right? But every single one of these issues has a different pinup, right? And then the deluxe edition puts together sketchbook, and then we have all the pinups right here. Okay, so there's different content in every single one of these. Now, fact check me if the interiors for the covers, for the interconnecting covers, but effectively, these are separate editions. They're separate SKUs. So combining all of them into that 6 million, 8 million in sales, in my view, is disingenuous. But Jim Lee launches X-Men #1. One of the best looking comics of all time. You got new printing, more detail. It was very hard for Jim Lee at one time to do his cross hatching. So Marvel was proactive, and they gave a better paper quality so we can see some of the line work. The newsprint muddied that up, and it was very frustrating. We take the money here and we get into Wildcats #1. I absolutely love this issue. I've read it a dozen times. This is 104. I've read all 4 issues. Like, we got Pike over here. If you guys need to know, our boy Pike, he's shoving a dude's face in spaghetti and kills him because it's 90s comics, and that's what we do. There's 2 different trading card sets. So that's got, we can kind of argue not 2 separate SKUs because you couldn't order them. You got what you got. From here, a book called Darker Image premieres. And it premieres Rob Liefeld's Blood Wolf, Sam Keith's The Max, that later went into MTV, and Jim Lee's Deathblow. So we have Deathblow #1. Now, Wildcats goes for a solid 5 years. 5 years. X-Men, solid 10 years. Solid, I believe the latest issue for this might have been 107. Punisher War Journal might have been 88 or 89. So we get it's like 10 years, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years. But Jim Lee pulls his Frank Miller inspiration and just gives us no cross hatching. It's all solid white, solid black, a lot of negative space, as you guys can see here, negative space. But it's not a full drawn issue. And it looks like he's using Sharpies and just different techniques. Techniques we're not familiar with. And then we have Sovereignty, Nick Manifold. So Jim Lee runs roughly 14 issues. We'll say 2 years. Maybe a year and a half on Wildcats. During that course, Wildcats goes into Saturday morning cartoon. It gets an SNES series, and it gets a Playmates action figure line. But when Jim Lee leaves Wildcats, he effectively doesn't really return. Here's Jim Lee's first comeback. Divine Right. The Adventures of Max Faraday. And this was his attempt to basically create a godlike being, Max Faraday, for the Wildstorm universe that would double as a loop. Max Faraday's adventure here kind of loops into the origin of the Wildstorm universe. And Max Faraday is a character that pretty much would like hang out at the Wildstorm studios. You know, like we have a lot, like I just believe this guy's like modeled over Brandon Chow. Like it's Jim Lee's comeback. He struggles to get this out on time. And towards the end, he gets a lot of help. Towards his end on Wildcats, it's a very similar pattern. He gets a lot of help from the studio, and he basically gets pulled over the finish line. So, Divine Right, people are not too happy. Not too happy. People like me read it, and they love it because, well, we're fanatics. So, during this time, Jim Lee leaves Image, right? He tries to take over Marvel Comics, tries to take over Marvel, moves to New York City, tries to move Marvel Comics to the West Coast, Heroes Reborn, Fantastic Four #1. This runs 13 issues. There was a plain 12. The last issue crosses over this Marvel Pocket Universe that later gets dissipated into or rolled back into Marvel Universe proper. But this little Pocket Universe crosses over with Jim Lee's Wildstorm Productions. But we get Jim Lee just kills it on this. Jim Lee roughly draws 6 issues of this though, because he's too busy trying to take over Marvel. The takeover gets blocked and he has to sell to DC because they had debt. He lost a lot of money with the Gen 13 movie. So in the intro, I spoke of Stormwatch. So many people think Jim Lee drew Stormwatch. Scott Clark's name's right on the cover. I think people just missed that. This image is so impactful. That's where I think the confusion comes from. But at first glance, you would think this is Jim Lee. You would just think this might be like a less detailed Jim Lee, but you know, like you have to have a good eye to discern some of this stuff. But this is Scott Clark. This is not Jim Lee. But when it comes to Jim Lee drawing Stormwatch, we have to go 5 years down the road and check out Stormwatch issue 47. That's nothing but splash pages. And this is, in my opinion, one of Jim Lee's absolute worst efforts. Just if we go page by page, we are disappointed, but it was a good publicity. And then a few issues later, Stormwatch would end with issue 50, and Stormwatch Volume 2 would begin. Along the way, we will get Jim Lee drawing. And I say Jim Lee because it's Richard Bennett, Alex Garner, Dane Panosian, Scott Williams. These are his embellishers. But Jim Lee would attempt to draw an issue of Savage Dragon. And again, if you have a good enough eye, you can tell that a lot of this is not Jim Lee. It's just not Jim Lee. We know what Jim Lee looks like. But this is his studio, and they mimic his attitude and his style best they can, because that's their job. Speaking of Gen 13, keep in mind, Jim Lee dumped a lot of his own personal money into the Gen 13 animated movie. That movie got bought and destroyed and benched by the Walt Disney Co. It only premiered in Australia, but it has lived on bootleg. That movie's available on this channel. But Jim Lee draws an issue of Gen 13. And it's a pretty good effort. It's not, I hate to say it, it's not as good, and we loved it and we were so used to it at the time. It's not as good or entertaining as the J. Scott Campbell Gen 13 issues. But this works. And during the time when this came out, to be perfectly honest, you thought Jim Lee had drew his last really good page. This is why Hush becomes so important. Jim Lee creates a trading card game called C23. I had people ask me, do I have the Jim Lee C23 issue? And I kindly respond,
I'm not aware that he drew one. Please forward the info. And they would forward this. And I'm like saying Jim Lee did not work on this. He just created it. His name is on top. Jim Lee C23. Rolling back to Heroes Reborn, I just want to highlight this. Issue 3 is my favorite issue of his entire Heroes Reborn run, because it's where Namor comes up, he wreaks havoc, and we get Jim Lee drawing. I mean, just one of the coolest looking Captain Americas you have ever seen. You want to say if this quality was consistent in Heroes Reborn, they would not have had a choice but to hand over everything to Jim Lee. But the quality skipped a beat when Jim Lee left this title. But we get some fantastic artwork. This is my favorite issue of those 6 issues. But speaking of number ones, this is one hell of an effort. And I always wanted the Jim Lee cover. The Jim Lee cover for this is amazing. I just dislike the Neil Adams cover. Wildcats X-Men Silver Age is one of his top tier efforts. He's back drawing the X-Men, but he's drawing Wildcats. He's drawing Nick Fury. Fantastic page layouts. Great negative space. They're on all cylinders on this issue. See, he's like doing like these bold lines. See those bold lines? This is very of the time. The industry has grown into being a little bit more graphical. We're getting big hair again. We're getting big eyes. We're getting big hands, big feet. So like that manga anime Joe Madora, Humberto Ramos influence is coming in. Jim Lee mimics some of that. But this is, in my opinion, one of Jim Lee's absolutely top efforts. And it's right here, Jim Lee drawing Pike. That's our boy. And this is a great story too, by the way. That's in issue 1, but it's not of a series, so that doesn't qualify. And then we have some random issues of Cyberforce, because we just can't keep our stacks in order. So guys, yeah, I just wanted to go through some other work of Jim Lee, but really just highlight his number ones. And I think they're all of note, because I think every single series, including Deathblow, went way longer than you thought it would. Divine Right was never intended to be a endless ongoing series. He said from the very beginning it had an ending. Took us a little bit to get there. But yeah, guys, we're critical of Jim Lee, but we sure love the mother effer.